my name is Layla Whitmore. I'm 22 years old, and until 6 months ago, I thought I had a pretty normal family. Parents who cared about appearances, a sister obsessed with the perfect wedding, and me, the quietly ambitious girl who never wanted to be in the spotlight. My life, at least from my perspective, was entirely unremarkable. I was the art student, the one who preferred sketching in a quiet corner to being the center of attention. I always figured that was just my place in the family dynamic, and honestly, I was fairly comfortable with it. It meant less pressure, fewer expectations, and more freedom to pursue my own interests without constant scrutiny. But then, one morning, everything changed. I woke up, and there they were. Patches of hair, dark strands against the white of my pillowcase, like a macabre offering. My scalp felt strangely lighter in places, airy where it should have been dense. As I slowly pushed myself up, a chilling realization washed over me. It wasn't just a few stray hairs, the kind that naturally fall out overnight. This was significant. This was deliberate. I stumbled to the mirror, my heart already pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. What stared back at me wasn't my reflection. It was a chaotic mess of uneven lengths, blunt cuts, and mangled sections. It looked like someone had taken a pair of dull scissors and gone to town on my head with a blindfold on. It was a travesty, a horror show. My once neat shoulder-length hair, which I had just gotten styled for Claire's engagement party, was utterly ruined. And that's when it hit me, a cold, hard wave of certainty that crashed through my morning haze. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't some sleep-deprived mistake on my part. This was calculated. Someone in my own home, someone I trusted implicitly, didn't want me to look better than the bride. They didn't want me to overshadow Claire on her big day, or on any of the events leading up to it, for that matter. The implication, the sheer audacity of it, left me breathless. It was an act of pure, unadulterated sabotage, carried out under the cover of night, in the one place I should have felt most secure. The perfect family facade that I had always believed in, or at least pretended to believe in, shattered around me in that moment, leaving only bitter shards. The realization that someone I shared a bloodline with, someone who was supposed to protect me, could do something so malicious and underhanded was a punch to the gut. The anger, sharp and hot, started to simmer deep within me, displacing the initial shock and despair. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely? Someone who you thought had your back, only to find them plunging a metaphorical knife into it? Leave a comment. I want to read your stories. I need to know I'm not alone in this twisted, unthinkable reality. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and buckle in. Because this story, my revenge, it's going to leave you stunned. Growing up in suburban Illinois, our family dynamic was carefully constructed, almost like a stage play of perfection. My mother, Cynthia, was the director, obsessed with appearances and maintaining an immaculate facade. Every strand of hair had to be perfectly in place, every social interaction polished, every family photo frame worthy. She micromanaged everything, from our wardrobes to our dinner conversations, all to project an image of effortless success. My father, Doug, was the traditional, somewhat passive actor. He was generally quiet, conservative in his views, and preferred to avoid any form of conflict, which often meant going along with whatever my mother dictated. His role was primarily to be the steady, unwavering patriarch, a strong, silent type, even if that silence often meant overlooking things that needed addressing. And then there was Claire, my older sister, the undeniable star of the show. She was older than me by 4 years, which in our family felt like an insurmountable chasm. From the moment she could walk, Claire embodied everything my mother valued. Straight A's in school were a given, not an achievement. She was prom queen twice, won every regional pageant she entered, and was always surrounded by a flock of admirers. She was the golden child, the one destined for greatness, and our parents never missed an opportunity to highlight her accomplishments. Her path was meticulously mapped out: successful career, perfect marriage, impeccable life. And now she was stepping into her ultimate role, wedding royalty. The entire family, it seemed, existed to celebrate and orbit around Claire's achievements. I, on the other hand, was always the supporting character, the quiet one. While Claire was excelling in pageants, I was tucked away in my room, sketching landscapes and portraits. While she was surrounded by friends, I was pursuing my graphic design studies in college, honing my skills in solitude, pouring my energy into visual narratives. I prefer the company of my art supplies to the relentless social charade our family maintained. Being overlooked became my natural state, almost a comfort. It meant fewer expectations, less pressure to conform to the narrow confines of my mother's perfect vision. It also meant a quieter existence, one where I could cultivate my own interests and talents without constant commentary or comparison. I genuinely believed I was content in that space, existing peacefully in Claire's shadow. And for 22 years, that's exactly how it was. I was the backdrop, the muted tone in their vibrant family portrait. I never sought the spotlight, actively shying away from any attention that might disrupt the delicate balance. I learned to blend in, to observe, to be the silent witness to their carefully constructed reality. But then came the engagement party. It was a lavish affair, of course, held at a country club, every detail meticulously orchestrated by my mother to showcase Claire's impending nuptials. I remember wearing a new dress, simple but elegant, and I had recently gotten a fresh haircut, nothing drastic, just a few layers to add some bounce. I walked in, expecting to melt into the background as usual, observing the festivities from a comfortable distance. But that night, for reasons I still can't quite pinpoint, something shifted. Maybe it was the way the light caught my hair, or perhaps the fit of the dress was unexpectedly flattering. Whatever it was, the script flipped. Guests, many of whom I hadn't seen in years, started approaching me. Relatives, who usually only offered a polite nod, stopped to chat, showering me with compliments. "Layla, you look incredible. Your hair is absolutely lovely. You've really blossomed." It was unexpected, almost disorienting. All eyes, for a fleeting moment, unexpectedly turned to me. And in our family, that was an act of rebellion, an unforgivable breach of the unspoken rules. The shift in attention at the engagement party was palpable, almost as if a collective, unspoken rule had been breached. I could feel the ripple effect across the room, the subtle changes in atmosphere. It was a sensation I wasn't used to and, frankly, hadn't sought. But there it was. Compliments flowed my way, sincere smiles from distant relatives, even a few whispers of genuine admiration from Claire's own friends. My new haircut, the simple, classic black dress that fit just right, the effortless confidence that comes from finally feeling comfortable in your own skin, it all seemed to coalesce into a presence I rarely projected. I tried to simply accept the compliments with grace, to deflect the praise back towards Claire's impending nuptials, to remind everyone what the occasion truly was. But it was like trying to redirect a current. People seemed genuinely pleased to see me looking. Well, good. For once, that quiet, unassuming Layla wasn't so quiet, not so unassuming. As the evening wore on, the undercurrent of unease from certain quarters became more apparent. Claire's bright, practiced smile began to falter whenever another well-meaning guest would turn to me with a compliment. It was almost imperceptible at first, a slight tighten around her eyes, a micro-expression of something akin to annoyance. But then it grew, blossoming into a full-blown scowl when she thought no one was looking, only to snap back into a saccharine grin when someone caught her eye. It was a performance, and I, for perhaps the first time, was seeing the cracks in the facade. My mother, Cynthia, ever the master of social camouflage, exhibited her discomfort in more subtle ways. Her jaw would subtly clench when someone said something flattering about my appearance, her hand gripping her wine glass a little too tightly, the knuckles turning white. Her eyes, usually so calculating and composed, would dart between me and the person complimenting me, then quickly snap back to Claire, as if trying to re-establish the hierarchy. It was a silent, almost theatrical display of displeasure, a clear signal that this deviation from the established order was not to be tolerated. The atmosphere around her felt charged, like static electricity before a storm. Later that night, as the party began to wind down and guests started to depart, Claire cornered me by the coat check. Her voice, usually so effortlessly charming, had a brittle edge to it. She started with what sounded like an attempt at casual conversation, a superficial inquiry about my graphic design work. Then her tone shifted, becoming lighter, almost teasing, but with an underlying sharpness that I was beginning to recognize. "You know, Layla," she began, a small, almost imperceptible scoff accompanying her words. "You really cleaned up well tonight. Everyone was talking about you." She paused, and her eyes, usually so direct, seemed to be appraising me, dissecting me. It wasn't a compliment, not really, it was a preface. Then came the half-joke. She draped an arm around my shoulder, a gesture that was more possessive than affectionate. "I swear, I should make you a bridesmaid. But only," and here she leaned in conspiratorially, her voice dropping to a stage whisper, "if you promise not to draw too much attention away from me. You know, it's my day after all." She pulled back, a wide, almost too bright smile plastered on her face, waiting for my reaction. It was a test, a veiled warning disguised as playful banter. I genuinely believed at the time that she was just being herself, playfully competitive. I laughed, a real, unforced laugh, dismissing her comment. "Claire, please," I said, genuinely amused by what I perceived as her characteristic need for the spotlight. As if, "You're the bride, the star. No one's looking at me." I shouldn't have laughed. I shouldn't have dismissed it. I shouldn't have treated it as a joke. Because it wasn't. It was an announcement, a prophecy. And I, in my naive belief that family was family and that a little harmless banter was just that, completely missed the true threat behind her joke. The gleam in her eye, the subtle shift in her posture, the way my mother watched us from across the room, a faint, almost satisfied smirk playing on her lips. They weren't joking. They were laying down the rules. And I, unknowingly, had just broken them. The engagement party was a recent memory, its veiled threats and sharp glances still echoing in my mind, but not yet registering as true warnings. The night before Claire's bridal brunch, a seemingly casual family gathering was arranged at my parents' house. It felt normal, almost reassuringly mundane. We had spaghetti for dinner, a family tradition. My mother, Cynthia, bustled around the kitchen, her usual composed self, directing my father, Doug, to set the table and Claire to chat about floral arrangements. I tried to focus on an art project, but kept getting pulled into conversations about wedding favors and seating charts. Later, we all gathered in the living room for what my dad called family bonding time, which usually meant watching Netflix together. Claire was engrossed in her phone, likely texting Jason about some minute detail of the wedding. My parents made polite small talk, discussing local gossip and new landscaping ideas. I remember feeling a strange sense of reprieve. Despite the underlying tension from the engagement party, this felt like our old family routine, a comfortable, if slightly strained, rhythm. I even found myself relaxing a little, lulled by the familiar patterns of our suburban household. The air was filled with the mundane sounds of a home at night, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant chirping of crickets, the hushed murmur of the TV. Around 10 p.m., feeling mentally drained from the forced cheerfulness and wedding chatter, I excused myself, citing an early morning presentation for my graphic design class. My parents nodded, barely looking up from the true crime documentary they were now absorbed in. Claire just grunted from the couch, still glued to her phone. I went to my old bedroom, a sanctuary of sorts from the carefully curated family image downstairs. I scrolled through social media for a bit, thinking about the upcoming bridal brunch and the many more wedding-related events that lay ahead. I had no idea of the truly horrifying event that awaited me in my own bed in my own home. I was completely oblivious, cocooned in a deceptive sense of security provided by the very people who would soon shatter it. I fell asleep fairly quickly, exhausted from navigating the social complexities of the previous weeks. The mattress was familiar, the air conditioning hummed softly, and for a short while I was at peace. Then came the morning. I woke up not to an alarm, but to a peculiar sensation. There was a lightness on one side of my head, an unfamiliar unevenness. As I shifted, something brushed against my face. Instinctively, I reached up, my fingers encountering something coarse and alien against my cheek. I opened my eyes slowly, still half asleep, and the first thing I saw was a dark, tangled clump of hair on my pillow. It wasn't just a few stray strands. It was a significant, unsettling amount. My eyes snapped open completely. A cold dread seeped into my stomach. I bolted upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. More hair was scattered around me like confetti, some clinging to my nightgown, some on the sheets. It was unmistakably my hair. Panic began to set in. I scrambled out of bed, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Had I done something in my sleep? Was I dreaming? I stumbled towards the full-length mirror on the back of my bedroom door, my hands trembling as I reached for the light switch. The reflection that greeted me was a disheveled nightmare. Patches of my hair were completely gone, savagely hacked away at different lengths. One side was significantly shorter than the other, ending abruptly in jagged lines. It looked like someone had taken a pair of garden shears and gone wild, leaving behind a jagged, uneven mess. My once smooth, shoulder-length hair was now a horror of frayed ends and gaping holes. It was an assault. My stomach churned with a mixture of disbelief and utter revulsion. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. This was malicious. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at my reflection, trying to process the violation. My hands flew to my head, tracing the rough, unwelcome edges of the damage. Who would do something like this? And why? Then, a sudden, chilling realization. I was in my parents' house. I had been asleep. There was no one else here who could have done this. No strangers, no intruders. The only logical explanation sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool morning air. Stunned, I crept out of my bedroom, down the hall, and into the kitchen. The smell of fresh coffee hung in the air, a stark contrast to the chaos exploding inside my head. My parents were already there, seated at the breakfast nook, sipping their coffee, reading the morning paper as if it were any other day. My mother, Cynthia, looked up, her expression serene. My father, Doug, barely registered my presence. I stood there, my hair a visible disaster, my eyes wide with shock and burgeoning rage. I waited. I desperately wanted one of them to say something, anything. To gasp, to ask what happened, to show some sign of concern or even surprise. But they didn't. They just sat there, calmly, serenely, in their perfectly ordered kitchen, playing their part in the picture frame of perfection. No one said a word about it, not one single word. Their silence was deafening, a crushing weight that confirmed my darkest suspicions. The air in the kitchen was thick with unspoken tension, a silence that felt heavier than any argument. My parents continued to sip their coffee, glancing at each other with unsettlingly calm expressions, completely ignoring my mutilated hair. It was a calculated affront, a deliberate act of dismissal. My voice, when it finally came, felt raw, choked with a mixture of disbelief and burgeoning fury. "What happened to my hair?" I demanded, my words trembling despite my efforts to control them. "Someone cut my hair while I slept." My mother, Cynthia, finally looked up, her expression a mask of feigned concern. "Oh, Lila," she sighed, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "You probably did it in your sleep. People do strange things when they're dreaming, you know." Her eyes held a dismissive flick, as if this was merely a trivial, self-inflicted mishap. She resumed stirring her coffee, her movements unnervingly unhurried. The casualness with which she delivered this absurd lie was a new level of coldness, a profound betrayal that began to twist in my gut. Before I could even process her outrageous suggestion, Claire sauntered into the kitchen, looking annoyingly pristine in her pastel athel, azure wear, undoubtedly ready for her bridal brunch. She took one look at me, and a small, almost imperceptible smirk played on her lips before she quickly replaced it with a theatrical eye roll. "Oh my God, Layla, are you serious right now?" she scoffed, her voice laced with exaggerated annoyance. "You're being so dramatic. It's just hair. It'll grow back. Do you have any idea how much stress I'm under with this wedding? This is hardly the time to make everything about yourself." Her words hit me like a physical blow. Just hair? My hair, which had been systematically butchered, was now being trivialized as just hair, a minor inconvenience in the face of her monumental wedding stress. The sheer audacity, the self-centeredness was breathtaking. Then my father, Doug, chimed in, his voice resonating with that familiar patriarchal tone of dismissal. "Claire's right, Layla. There's no need to make a mountain out of a molehill, especially during Claire's wedding week. This is an important time for your sister. You shouldn't be causing unnecessary drama." He folded his newspaper with an air of finality, effectively closing the conversation. His words, delivered with such practiced neutrality, sanctioned their deception, validating their lies. I stood there, reeling from their combined assault. Tears welled in my eyes, hot and stinging, blurring my vision. I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of their gaslighting. They were making me question my own sanity, making me doubt what I knew to be true. Did I do it? Could I have? The desperate hope that they were telling the truth, that I was simply having a mental lapse, warred with the terrifying certainty that they were lying, effortlessly manipulating me. "You're lying," I screamed, the words tearing from my throat, raw with humiliation and fury. "I didn't do this. You know I didn't." My voice cracked, thick with the tears I could no longer hold back. I cried, I sobbed, I pleaded with them to admit the truth, to show some flicker of remorse, some sign that they recognized the gravity of what had happened. But their faces remained impassive, their eyes cold and unwavering. They stood united, a wall of calculated normalcy against my rising panic. It was a suffocating, isolating experience, designed to break me, to make me doubt my own reality. Finally, defeated by their refusal to acknowledge the truth, I stumbled away, my mind a storm of accusations and self-doubt. The rational part of my brain, however, refused to be silenced. It was an impossible scenario. Even in the deepest sleep, I would have woken up from such a violent act. My hands trembled as I walked towards the bathroom, a new, desperate idea forming. And then, there it was, in the trash can, tucked beneath a wad of discarded tissue, glinting innocently under the harsh bathroom light, a pair of sharp, black-handled scissors. Not my small crafting scissors, but large, sturdy kitchen shears. My blood ran cold. And then, clinging to the blades, a few familiar dark strands. My hair, my own unmistakable hair. But that wasn't all. As I reached deeper into the trash, my fingers brushed against something else. A crumpled receipt. My heart pounded as I smoothed it out. It was from the local beauty supply store, dated yesterday evening. And the itemized purchase? A box of dark brown hair dye, my natural color. And the name on the receipt? Cynthia Whitmore. The final pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with a sickening thud. The scissors, the clump of my hair, the receipt, the hair dye. It wasn't just a random act of malice. It was a deliberate, premeditated attempt to disfigure me, and then to cover it up, to hide the evidence, and make me believe I was losing my mind. My mother, the architect of our perfect family image, was behind this. The ultimate betrayal, the gaslighting, the false sympathy, the dismissal, it was all part of their elaborate, cruel charade. The tears dried, replaced by an icy, burning resolve. My family wasn't just flawed. They were capable of a calculated cruelty I had never imagined. And I had the proof. Teach a moment, I found that receipt, those scissors, and those telltale strands of my hair. Something inside me snapped. The humiliating tears, the gut-wrenching self-doubt, the desperate plea for their acknowledgement, it all evaporated, replaced by an icy, searing rage. It wasn't just about my hair anymore. It was about the calculated cruelty, the gaslighting, the sheer audacity of trying to make me question my own reality. They hadn't just cut my hair. They had tried to cut away my sanity. And that was unforgivable. I walked out of their pristine kitchen without a single word. My chopped, mangled hair was hidden under a hastily tied scarf, a pathetic attempt at camouflage. I drove straight back to my own apartment, the silence of my car punctuated only by the frantic beat of my own enraged heart. The world outside felt muted, distant, as if I was moving through a warped reality. The next week was a blur of angry silence. I didn't answer my parents' calls, ignoring a few dismissive texts from Claire, probably wondering if I was over my little tantrum yet. I avoided mirrors, my self-consciousness about my hair compounded by the chilling knowledge of who had done it. Every waking moment was consumed by a dark, simmering resentment. I felt humiliated, violated, and utterly alone in my fury. It was a poison eating away at me from the inside. Days later, my best friend, Nikki Tran, burst into my apartment like a breath of fresh air, albeit a very determined and slightly snarky one. She had been texting me nonstop, but I hadn't had the energy to respond. She took one look at my sullen face, my scarf-wrapped head, and the grim set of my jaw, and immediately understood. I didn't have to say a word. Nikki knew me better than anyone. Instead of pity, her gaze hardened with a shared indignation. "All right, Spill," she commanded, settling onto my couch th a bag of snacks. "The silent treatment only works for so long, Lila. What did they do this time? And why are you wearing a scarf indoors in July?" Her eyes narrowed, taking in my appearance, her expression shifting from concern to a growing anger. I unfolded the entire story to her, the compliments at the engagement party, Claire's veiled threats, the peaceful spaghetti dinner, the horrifying discovery, and the cold, calculated gaslighting from my parents. I showed her the receipt I had crumpled into my pocket, the faint outline of the scissors on the trash bag. As I spoke, the anger in my voice escalated, and by the time I finished, I was shaking. Nikki listened, her face slowly transforming from shock to a fierce, almost predatory resolve. When I had laid out every agonizing detail, she leaned forward, her eyes blazing. "Okay, let me get this straight," she said, her voice low and steady. "They physically assaulted you while you slept, tried to make you believe you were crazy, and then had the audacity to blame you for being dramatic when you found evidence of their crime?" I nodded, unable to speak, tears pricking at my eyes again, but this time they were tears of pure, unadulterated rage. Nikki slammed her fist lightly on the coffee table. "This isn't just family drama, Layla," she declared, her snarky humor temporarily replaced by a steely seriousness. "This is war. And you, my friend, need to go full CIA on them. No more quiet art student. It's time for the revenge of the underestimated." And in that moment, with Nikki's unwavering support and fiery conviction, the burn was born. My internal agony shifted, transforming from a consuming despair into a tangible, focused determination. The anger, rather than poisoning me, became fuel. That night, the revenge plan began to take shape. Nikki, with her hacker-savvy mind, and I, with my meticulous attention to detail, started to gather our arsenal. For years, I had quietly observed my artistic eye picking up on the nuances of family interactions, the subtle power plays, the hidden secrets. I had a surprisingly deep reservoir of dirt on the Whitmore clan. I started sifting through old phone backups, dusty external hard drives, even old emails. Secrets. Receipts from questionable purchases. Screenshots of petty arguments. Every shred of evidence, big or small, went into a meticulously organized digital folder. Oh, and then there was Claire's fiance, Jason. Handsome, polished, and outwardly charming, but with a definite streak of shallow opportunism. I remembered, quite distinctly, a series of messages he had sent me ages ago, before he and Claire were even seriously dating. Innocent at first, then progressively flirting, he had messaged me after meeting me at a family holiday gathering, commenting on my spark and how he wished Claire had my unconventional artistic touch. He had even asked me out for coffee, claiming it was just to chat about creative pursuits. I'd politely end, of course, but I had a screenshot of the entire conversation. It was buried deep in my old phone, but I knew it was there. And now it felt like a golden ticket, a digital dagger waiting to be unleashed. The game was on. My family had thought they could break me, silence me, erase me. They were about to learn that quiet observers often see the most. With Nikki as my co-conspirator, the revenge plan truly began to take shape. My anger, once a suffocating weight, transformed into a sharp, strategic tool. We started with the most obvious weapon in the 21st century arsenal: social media. Claire had spent her entire life cultivating a perfect, pristine public image, and I was about to dismantle it brick by digital brick. I created an anonymous Instagram account. Its name was something innocuous, like Whitmer Wedding Watch or Claire and Jason House. The entire premise was to act as a hyper-enthusiastic, unofficial fan page dedicated to Claire's wedding. I started by posting generic, flattering content, stock photos of wedding dresses, inspirational quotes about true love, countdowns to the big day. I even dug up some early, genuinely sweet photos of Claire and Jason from their engagement announcement. It was all designed to build credibility, to appear as a harmless, excited supporter. The account gained traction surprisingly fast. Claire's inherent appeal, coupled with the natural curiosity surrounding a large, extravagant event like hers, drew in followers quickly. People love wedding content, especially when it promises an inside look. Once I had a decent following and an established veneer of legitimacy, I switched tactics, introducing what I slyly called exclusive leaks. With Nikki's tech-savvy help and my eye for visual manipulation, these leaks were not only convincing but devastatingly effective. First came the relatively tame drops, screenshots of family drama, carefully cropped to highlight my mother's controlling nature or my father's dismissive statements. Nothing overtly scandalous, just enough to sow seeds of doubt about the perfect family narrative. These were subtle jabs, designed to chip away at the polished facade without revealing my hand too early. I'd pair them with vague, dramatic captions like, "Looks like even perfect families have their moments." #wedding stress, #families. The comment sections would light up with speculation, but no one could pinpoint the source. Then I escalated. I started posting throwback photos of Claire from her college days. Not just any photos, but carefully selected ones that subtly undermined her current image as the epitome of grace and poise. There were blurry party photos of her holding red cups with questionable expressions, or screen grabs from old, forgotten Facebook albums where she looked undeniably less than angelic. I even unearthed a few truly unflattering shots of her being overtly mean to other girls back in college, maybe a scowl aimed at someone, or a dismissive D gesture, with a little Photoshop magic to enhance the mean girl expressions and the perfect dramatic filter. These images painted a very different picture. My captions for these were more pointed. Remember when? They say true colors never fade. #colleague throwback, #Brit The internet, as always, consumed it with relish. The more the account gained followers, the wider the net of gossip spread. But the real digital dagger, the one I knew would cause the most damage, was Jason's flirty messages. I had methodically gone back through my old phone backups, found the conversations, and carefully screenshot them. Each message was a small chip at the foundation of Claire's perfect relationship. They weren't just harmless pleasantries. They were clearly suggestive, questioning his commitment even before the engagement. "Wish I met you before Claire," read one. "You're so much more interesting than anyone at our family gatherings," said another. The timestamps proved they were sent well into his relationship with Claire. I timed the release of these messages perfectly, waiting for a moment when the conversation around the account was simmering, just about to boil over. The first batch, a few ambiguous messages, were dropped with a caption like, "Is someone's fans having wandering eyes?" #wedding drama, #prenup needed. The reaction was immediate. People who had been defending Claire started to question. The account's engagement skyrocketed. Then, a day later, I unleashed the full, unedited string of the most incriminating messages. The internet went wild. The comments section devolved into a chaotic blend of outrage, sympathy for Claire or derision, and endless speculation. "OMG, he's a cheat. Poor Claire." I knew he was too good to be true. The story didn't stay confined to Instagram. It spilled over onto local gossip blogs, wedding forums, and soon, even regional news outlets. Claire's carefully constructed image, meant to be unblemished and idolized, began to crumble under the relentless weight of her own lies and Jason's indiscretions. The facade was cracking, and it was glorious to watch. This wasn't just about cutting hair. It was about exposing the rot beneath the surface of their perfect lives. Digital daggers had landed, and the fallout was immediate and spectacular. My anonymous Instagram account, once a mere annoyance, had become a wildfire of gossip, burning through Claire's carefully constructed reputation. 3 days before the wedding, the rumor mill wasn't just spinning, it was exploding. My phone, which had been silent for days after my initial outburst, now buzzed with messages from distant relatives and family friends, all referencing the scandalous wedding expose. Relatives began flying into town, not just for the wedding, but for the drama. Their whispers filled the air, replacing excited chatter with hushed tones of scandal and speculation. People who had once praised Claire's perfection now exchanged knowing glances, their forced smiles barely concealing their judgment. Every family gathering, every pre-wedding event, became a hotbed of hushed conversations and suspicious stares. Our family, normally so adept at maintaining a flawless facade, was visibly crumbling. The biggest impact, however, was on Jason. He had stopped answering Claire's calls. His social media presence, once so active, went completely dark. The flirty messages I'd leaked had gone viral within their social circles, creating a firestorm he clearly hadn't anticipated. His friends were likely giving him grief, and his own family was probably demanding answers. Claire, who thrived on control and outward appearances, was visibly unraveling. Her perfectly manicured veneer was cracking under the immense pressure. I heard through the grapevine, from a cousin who worked at the same firm as Jason's mother, that there were heated arguments and threats of calling off the entire wedding if the scandal wasn't resolved. Amidst this manufactured chaos, my parents were in damage control mode. Cynthia, the architect of our family's perfect image, was beside herself. Doug, usually so passive, was animated with a desperate attempt to restore order. They tried everything, blaming hackers, accusing jealous trolls, threatening legal action against unknown entities. They called on every ounce of their social capital, trying to squash the stories, to restore faith in Claire's pristine fairy tale. They spread absurd counter-narratives about my disgruntled ex-boyfriend or a rival from college behind the anonymous account. The irony of them accusing others of malicious digital attacks, when they themselves had physically attacked me, was not lost on me. It only fueled my resolve. I, meanwhile, maintained a masterful poker face. I stopped responding to anyone's messages, remaining a ghost in the family discourse. I didn't confirm or deny anything, letting the internet turn on its own. When it came to physically being present, I chose my moments carefully. I knew my mere physical presence would be a lightning rod, a stark reminder of the underlying tension and the visible manifestation of their cruelty. I knew that my hair, still a chopped mess underneath, would invite questions and unwanted attention. So, for the rehearsal dinner, the last official family gathering before the wedding, I made an entrance. I strolled in wearing a sleek, perfectly styled black wig. It was sophisticated, chic, completely transforming my appearance. I had purchased it online, a small investment in my grand play. The wig was long, glossy, and straight, framing my face perfectly, almost like a crown. I paired it with a simple, elegant black dress, deliberately understated, yet powerful. I looked composed, serene, every inch the queen in mourning. My inner chaos was hidden behind a perfectly polished exterior. The reaction from the relatives was a mix of silent judgment, nervous glances, and a noticeable awkwardness. Why parents, upon seeing me, exchanged panicked looks. The wig was a strategic move I knew they hadn't anticipated. It erased the visual evidence of their crime, yet in its very presence, it highlighted the fact that something was terribly wrong. It was a silent accusation, a visual metaphor for the lies they tried to bury. I smiled politely, a serene, unreadable expression on my face, greeting relatives with calm composure. "Lovely to see you," I'd say, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside. I watched Claire, whose eyes were red-rimmed and whose movements were stiff and unnatural. She looked at me, a flash of something akin to fear, or perhaps just intense frustration, crossing her face when she saw my polished appearance. The contrast between her visible distress and my quiet, composed demeanor was striking. I was no longer the quiet, overlooked younger sister. I was an enigma, a calm presence in the middle of a storm, conducting a symphony of chaos that only I understood. Every whispered rumor, every strained smile, every averted gaze in that room was a testament to the power of the digital daggers I had wielded. The quiet one was finally making herself heard. The pieces were all in place. The stage was set for the final ACTG wedding day dawned crisp and clear, a picture-perfect morning for what was supposed to be Claire's dream come true. The venue, a sprawling estate with manicured gardens, glittered under the early sun. Guests arrived, dressed in their finest, their faces a mix of eager anticipation and barely disguised curiosity. The rumor mill I had stoked had done its job. Everyone knew something was brewing, but no one knew quite how explosive the finale would be. I arrived early, dressed in a muted, elegant gown, with my perfectly styled black wig firmly in place. I blended into the background of the pre-ceremony bustle, observing the nervous energy, the forced smiles, the whisper network in full effect. My parents moved like tightrope walkers, trying to project an air of calm normalcy, but their eyes constantly darted around, searching for a threat they couldn't define. Claire, sequestered in her bridal suite, was an unseen tempest, her stress palpable even through thick walls. Jason, though, had been completely absent since the rehearsal dinner, only fueling the rampant speculation. My final act was set in motion just moments before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. Precision timing was everything. As the ushers began seating the last remaining guests, and the string quartet started playing the prelude, I pressed send. I had drafted the email weeks ago, refining every word, attaching every piece of undeniable evidence. The subject line was chillingly simple, yet devastatingly effective. The truth beneath the veil. The recipients list was comprehensive. Every member of the bridal party, both extended families, the closest friends of my parents and Claire, literally everyone who mattered in their careful, constructed social circle. It was a digital bomb, dropped right into the heart of their performance. Inside the email, I laid it all bare. Every single secret, every lie, every manipulative act. It started with the hair-cutting confession, the most damning piece of physical evidence. Nikki had helped me set up a Google Nest indoor camera in my old room during my last visit, which picked up snippets of my parents' conversation after they'd assumed I was asleep. There was a faint audio clip, amplified for clarity, where my mother whispered something about making sure Lila doesn't overshadow Claire, and a soft snip, followed by my father's quiet agreement. It wasn't a full confession, but combined with the receipt and scissors, it painted an undeniable picture. Then came the manipulative diaries I had unearthed from my mother's old belongings, not actual diaries, but meticulously kept planners with notes detailing how to manage Claire's image, how to subtly undermine mine, how to leverage family events for social gain. It was chillingly methodical. And finally, the undeniable proof of Jason's duplicity. The full, unredacted text messages, screenshots of all his flirty advances, chronologically ordered, showing a pattern of betrayal that dated back longer than anyone knew. It left no room for doubt, no space for denial. I had woven a narrative so airtight, so damning, that it would be impossible to refute. As the first few notes of the wedding march began to play, signifying the start of the ceremony, a ripple went through the seated guests. Phones, which had been buzzing unnoticed at first, were now being pulled out en masse. Faces paled, whispers turned into gasps, and eyes widened in disbelief as people scrolled through the damning email. The carefully orchestrated beginning of Claire's perfect day was interrupted by a cacophony of quiet horror. Claire, radiant in her elaborate gown, began her slow walk down the aisle. She floated past the rows of stunned faces, her eyes fixed on Jason at the altar. She was oblivious, lost in her bridal fantasy. But Jason wasn't. As Claire reached the altar, a collective silence had fallen over the guests, charged with the tension of revelation. He stood there, pale and stiff, his hands clasped, not in anticipation, but in sheer terror. His eyes darted around, catching the distraught faces of his parents, the horrified expressions of his groomsmen, and finally settling on Claire, who had just stepped onto the altar beside him, her face beaming. Just as the officiant cleared his throat to begin the ceremony, Jason spoke. His voice, though low, carried clearly in the suddenly silent hall. "I can't do this," he choked out, his gaze fixed on Claire, but his words aimed at the room. I know what everyone's seeing. I'm sorry, Claire. I can't." Claire's smile faltered, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What? Jason, what are you talking about?" she whispered, her eyes wide with bewilderment. He shook his head, looking utterly defeated. "Everything, Claire. The messages. I can't. This isn't right." The gasp that swept through the room was audible. Claire's face transformed, from confusion to dawning horror, then to fiery rage. She looked at Jason, then at her parents, whose faces were now a mixture of abject despair and fury directed at the assembled guests, as if they were the culprits. "You coward!" she shrieked, no longer the composed bride, but a heartbroken, enraged woman. She ripped off her veil, tearing it from her head and flinging it to the floor. "How could you do this?" Jason, having delivered his public confession, didn't respond. He simply turned and walked away, past the shocked bridal party, past the stunned guests, out of the grand hall and out of Claire's life. The once perfect wedding ceremony dissolved into utter chaos. Claire stumbled, collapsing onto the altar steps, her bridesmaids rushing to her side. My mother let out a guttural cry, more of frustration than genuine pain, and my father stood frozen, his facade finally shattering. The fairy tale had imploded publicly and spectacularly at the altar in front of everyone, and I, the quiet, overlooked sister, watched it all unfold, a quiet satisfaction settling in my heart. The mic had been dropped, and the truth finally was the wedding implosion was swift and decisive. In the immediate aftermath, there was a desperate scramble by my parents to contain the scandal, but it was like trying to catch smoke. Claire, utterly humiliated and heartbroken, packed her bags within days. She moved across the country to Denver, ostensibly to start over. I heard she took a job in marketing there, trying to rebuild her life away from the wreckage of her Illinois fairy tale. I haven't heard much from her since, and that's perfectly fine with me. I suspect she'll never truly escape what happened, no matter how far she runs. The weight of her own actions, and the public exposure of them, will follow her. My parents? They barely speak to me now. The rare calls or texts are stiff, formal, always about some trivial family matter. There's no warmth, no pretense of a normal parent-child relationship. They finally understand the depth of my anger, the deliberate nature of my revenge. They know I was the hacker, the jealous troll. The silence between us is thick with their silent recriminations, their profound disappointment not in my actions, but in the fact that I dared to expose their carefully constructed lies. We exist in separate orbits now, bound only by blood, but fractured by betrayal. And that's okay, because after the chaos subsided, I finally cut them off, both emotionally and financially. It was a liberation I had never truly envisioned for myself. For so long, I had been tethered to their expectations, their perceived financial support, their definition of family. But then, a few months after the wedding, a surprising letter arrived. It was from Lila F. informing me of a small but significant inheritance from my grandma Eloise, my father's eccentric aunt, who had always seemed to see something in me that my parents overlooked. She had passed away quietly a year prior, and had apparently set up a trust just for me. It wasn't enough to make me wealthy, but it was enough for me to breathe, to stand on my own 2 feet, entirely independent of my parents' financial strings. That unexpected gift was the final severing blow, the ultimate affirmation that I didn't need their approval or their money to thrive. It felt like a posthumous embrace from the only family member who truly understood me, a silent rebellion against the rigid rules of the Whitmore household. I had never felt lighter, freer, more truly myself. In the months that followed, I focused on myself. Initially, my hair was a constant, visible reminder of the violation. I'd wear caps, scarves, anything to hide the uneven mess. But as it began to grow out, slowly, steadily, stronger than before, so did I I stopped hiding it. I visited a skilled stylist who helped me shape the growing layers, embracing a shorter, edgier style. And then, one day, I decided to do something truly radical, something that felt like a definitive break from the subdued, quiet Layla I used to be. I dyed it. Not just a touch-up, but a wild, bright red. It's vibrant. It's fiery. It's untamed. And it's exactly how I feel inside. Every time I look in the mirror, it's not just a reflection of my hair. It's a reflection of my journey. It's a physical manifestation of reclaiming my identity, my spirit, my voice. The hair that was meant to be my humiliation became my rebellion. It's a constant reminder that sometimes the most profound transformations come from the deepest wounds. I still pursue graphic design, but with a newfound passion and purpose. My art is bolder, more expressive, infused with a fire that wasn't there before. A quiet observer has become a powerful storyteller, no longer afraid to put her truth out into the world. The pain hasn't vanished completely, the scars remain, but they have indeed turned into a crown. Each strand of my wild, red hair feels like a triumph, a testament to resilience, to justice, and to the strength found in standing up for yourself, even when it means breaking away from everything you thought defined you. Sometimes, the deepest betrayals don't come silently or subtly. Sometimes, they arrive with the brutal snip of scissors in the dead of night, wielded by those you would have instinctively taken a bullet for. My story is a testament to that harsh truth. It shattered my perception of family, exposing a darkness I never imagined existed beneath the veneer of suburban perfection. It forced me to confront the painful reality that the people who were supposed to love and protect me were the very ones capable of the most calculated cruelty. But there's something profoundly poetic about turning pain into power. The humiliation, the gaslighting, the feeling of being violated of these were supposed to break me, to reduce me to the quiet, overlooked girl they wanted me to be. Instead, they forged a new Layla, one who understood that her voice was a weapon, her truth an undeniable force. The act of cutting my hair, intended to diminish me, ultimately became the catalyst for an extraordinary transformation. It forced me to look inwards, to find a strength I never knew I possessed, and to reclaim parts of myself that had been suppressed for far too long. My story isn't simply about revenge, though the satisfaction of seeing Claire's perfect world crumble and my parents' carefully constructed facade shatter was undeniably profound. It's about something far more vital, reclaiming my voice, my beauty, and my sense of justice in a world that tried to steal them from me. It's about standing up for yourself when no one else will, especially when those betrayers are etched into your very DNA. It's about choosing self-preservation and inner peace over maintaining a toxic, appearance-driven family dynamic. The scars of that night remain, etched into my memory, but they are no longer wounds. They have become marks of resilience, testaments to my fight, and ultimately, a crown I wear with unwavering pride. My bright red, untamed hair is a constant reminder of the phoenix that rose from the ashes of betrayal. So, I have to ask you, have you ever had to take justice into your own hands? Have you ever faced such a profound betrayal that it ignited a fire within you to seek your own form of retribution or, more importantly, reclamation? What did you do? How did you find your path through the darkness? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your stories of resilience, of fighting back, of finding your own kind of justice. Every voice that shares its truth is another light in the darkness. Like, subscribe, and stick around. The world is full of untold stories and hidden truths. I have a dozen more to unleash, and you won't want to miss them.